My daughter got married last week. I found out, after it happened, no dress fitting, no mother-daughter moment, not even a text. Then she called asking for the beach house. For her honeymoon. No apology, just a demand. But here's the part no one saw coming. I said yes. You'll never guess what happened next. If you want to know what really happened, stay with me until the end. Before diving into this shocking mystery, God will bless you if you write amen in the comments. And if you love thrilling, breathtaking stories, don't forget to subscribe. I never thought I'd see the day when my daughter stopped calling me just to talk about nothing in particular. For years, our conversations had been the soft background music of my life, little check-ins that meant everything, even if the topics were as small as a new coffee flavor she'd discovered or a silly meme she'd seen on her lunch break. My name is Helen Parker. I'm 65 years old, a retired nurse, and I live in a small white clapboard house in Portland, Maine. I've been here for over 30 years, long enough to see the seasons turn in their endless rhythm, long enough to know the sound of the ocean on a windy night better than I know my own heartbeat. My daughter, Claire, has been my pride and joy for as long as I've drawn breath. I raised her alone after her father, David, walked away when she was 8. We'd weathered storms together, emotional ones, financial ones, and built a life that was ours alone. Until recently, I thought there was nothing in this world that could shake the foundation we'd built. Our bond was forged in ordinary moments. On snowy January mornings, I'd see her off to school with a thermos of hot chocolate. In the summers, we'd pack the car and drive down to the family's beach house in Kennebunkport, our little slice of heaven. I'd inherited it from my parents, and it had been in our family for 15 years. Claire learned to swim there, her small hands gripping my wrists as I coaxed her into the chilly Atlantic. She learned to ride her bike in the sandy lane that led down to the dunes. We decorated a little pine tree on the porch every Christmas in July, just for fun. Even after she moved to Boston for her marketing job, the calls kept coming. Every day around noon, my phone would ring, and her voice would come tumbling through the line light. Warm, animated. We'd talk about her coworkers, the series she was binge-watching, her latest attempt at a new recipe, and sometimes we'd talk about the bigger things, her fears about the future, her hopes for a family of her own someday. She used to say, "Mom, if I can find someone who understands me half as well as you do, I'll consider myself lucky." I believed her. So when she told me, 2 years ago, that she'd met someone, I was ready to be happy for her. Claire had had her share of dating disasters, men who ghosted, men who turned out to be married, men who couldn't handle her ambition. She deserved someone who would see her for who she was. Smart, kind, a little stubborn, fiercely loyal. I remember the day she brought him home, like it was yesterday. It was early October, the leaves in our neighborhood burning in shades of orange and gold. I'd spent the afternoon making my lasagna, the one she'd been requesting since she was 12. Claire showed up at the door glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. "Mom, this is Ethan," she said, her voice bright, her hand tucked neatly into his arm. Ethan Ward looked like he'd stepped straight out of a magazine. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a smile polished to perfection. He wore an expensive navy suit, even though it was just dinner at my house, and carried a dozen roses like he'd walked out of a romantic comedy. From the moment he stepped inside, he was generous with his compliments. "Your home is beautiful, Mrs. Parker," he said, his eyes sweeping over the modest living room like it was the lobby of a 5-star hotel. "Claire's told me so much about it, and about the beach house. It sounds like a dream." He mentioned the beach house 3 more times over dinner. At first, I brushed it off as enthusiasm. After all, it was a special place for us. Still, something about the way he said it, like the words property value were hidden between the lines, made a small warning bell ring in the back of my mind. But Claire was so happy, I swallowed my doubts. Over garlic bread and lasagna, Ethan asked about my nursing career, about raising Claire on my own, about the history of the Kennebunkport house. He listened with an attentiveness that felt almost too perfect, nodding at all the right moments, smiling in all the right ways. When dinner was over, he helped clear the table, insisting on doing the dishes. Before they left, he hugged me and said, "Your mother raised an amazing daughter, Mrs. Parker, you must be so proud. And I was proud of Claire's independence, her success, the life she'd built without needing to rely on anyone, proud that she'd found someone she seemed to believe in so completely. If only I'd known that night that Ethan Ward wasn't what he appeared to be. If only I'd realized that sometimes the most dangerous people aren't the ones who storm into your life with obvious malice, but the ones who slip in with roses in one hand and charm in the other. Back then, though, I had no reason to suspect anything. All I saw was my daughter laughing more than she had in years, and a man who seemed to adore her. I told myself that if Claire was happy, I should be happy for her. That's what mothers are supposed to do. But sometimes, loving someone means you can't just take their happiness at face value. Sometimes, loving someone means paying attention to the warning bells, even when they're faint. I didn't yet know that those faint bells were the first notes of an alarm that would one day be deafening. For a while after that dinner, things seemed fine, better than fine. In fact, Claire sounded lighter on the phone, as though Ethan had lifted some invisible weight off her shoulders. They went on weekend trips, tried out new restaurants, and even took a spontaneous road trip up the coast to Bar Harbor. I'd get texts from her with pictures of lobster rolls, sunsets over the water, and the two of them smiling with their heads pressed together. It wasn't until those texts started replacing our phone calls that I noticed the change. At first, I brushed it off. She's busy, I told myself. New relationships are exciting, and they take time. I'd been her age once. I remembered how intoxicating that early stage could be. But over the months, the calls that had been daily turned into once a week, then once every 2 weeks. And when she did call, Ethan's name would come up more and more. What he thought, what he wanted, what he believed was best for us as a couple. It was during one of those rare calls that I first heard the phrase boundaries in a way that made my stomach knot. Ethan thinks it's important for couples to prioritize each other, Claire said casually, as if she were reading it from a self-help book. He's been reading about healthy boundaries with family. I tried to keep my voice neutral. Boundaries are fine, sweetheart, but you and I have always been close. Has something changed? Not really, she replied quickly. It's just, he wants us to make sure our marriage when we get there has a strong foundation. And sometimes that means less outside influence. Outside influence. That was a new term for me. Apparently, I was now in the same category as coworkers giving bad advice or friends gossiping about their own relationships. Still, I bit my tongue. If there's one thing you learn as a nurse, it's that people rarely take the medicine they don't think they need. By the spring of 2021, the changes were undeniable. Claire's visits to Portland became infrequent. She missed Easter for the first time in her life, citing a last-minute trip to New York with Ethan. She skipped the 4th of July at the beach house, claiming Ethan had other plans. I told myself it was temporary, that once the honeymoon phase passed, she'd remember the traditions that had always anchored her. Then came the engagement. I didn't hear about it from her. I heard about it from Facebook. One Sunday morning, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my coffee and scrolling through my feed, when a photo popped up, Claire's hand, fingers slightly curled, wearing a diamond so large it caught the reflection of the cafe lights above her. The caption read, "He asked." I said yes. "I can't wait to start our forever together." 53 likes. A dozen comments. "Congratulations. So happy for you two." Not one person asking where her mother was in that moment. I stared at that photo for 10 solid minutes, my coffee growing cold in my hands. When I finally called, Claire's voice was breathless and giddy. "Oh my gosh. Mom, I was going to call you this morning. It just happened last night. Ethan surprised me at our favorite restaurant. Then we went to his place and called his parents. We stayed up so late. I didn't want to wake you." I forced warmth into my voice. "Congratulations. Sweetheart, tell me everything." And she did for 20 minutes. She talked about the ring, the proposal, how Ethan's parents had started planning an engagement party at their country club, how they were thinking of a spring wedding. "When's the engagement party?" I asked. There was a pause. "Next Saturday. It's going to be small, just immediate family and a few close friends." "Should I drive down Friday night?" Another pause, longer this time. "Mom, about that, Ethan's family has very specific traditions. His mother planned everything, and it's really just for his side and some of our couple friends. We'll do something special with you later. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I see. And what do you think about that? I think it's important to respect their way of doing things. She said, respect their way of doing things. Another phrase that didn't sound like her. We never did have that something special. She promised. Months passed. I saw Ethan twice. Both times in passing. Both times polite but distant, as though I were an elderly aunt rather than the woman who'd raised Claire alone. The wedding planning happened entirely around me. I'd hear scraps about venues they'd toured, the flowers they'd chosen, but whenever I offered to help, the answer was the same. Ethan's got it covered, or his mother has connections. By the summer of 2022, my role in my own daughter's life felt like that of a spectator. I tried to be gracious, to keep my bitterness to myself, but the sting was sharpest when she dismissed the idea of getting married at the beach house. Oh no, Mom, she said. Ethan wants something more elegant, more sophisticated than a backyard beach wedding. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But when your daughter has told you for years she dreamed of getting married barefoot in the sand, hearing her toss that dream aside for someone else's definition of sophisticated feels like losing something you can't name. Then came the conversation that shifted everything. It was a Tuesday evening in early autumn. I was reorganizing the linen closet when my phone rang. Claire's voice was careful, almost rehearsed. Mom, I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to be cool about it. Go on, I said, bracing myself. Ethan thinks it's important for us to establish independence as a couple from the very beginning. He feels like I've relied on you emotionally for most of my life, like calling you when I'm upset instead of working through things with him. He says, that could cause problems in our marriage. I felt the words hit me like a slow punch. Claire, talking to your mother when you're upset isn't unhealthy. It's normal. That's what I said. But he showed me articles about how women who put their mothers before their husbands end up divorced. I don't want to be that wife. I recognized the tactic immediately. This wasn't about healthy boundaries. This was about isolation. And what does this mean? Practically, I asked. It means less frequent contact, more space for Ethan and me to build our own traditions. Also, we might spend Christmas with his family this year, just to break the pattern. Christmas. We'd spent every Christmas together since David left. It wasn't just a holiday, it was our anchor in the storm. I swallowed the ache in my throat. I see. Anything else? She hesitated. Ethan also thinks the beach house situation is complicated. He feels like he can't truly relax there because it's yours, not ours. He suggested we find our own special places, as if the place where she'd learned to swim, where we'd made countless memories, was suddenly not special enough. That night, I sat in the quiet of my living room, long after we'd hung up, staring at the framed photos on the mantel. Claire at age 6 in a polka dot swimsuit, splashing in the surf. Claire at 16, wrapped in a beach towel, grinning into the wind. The tide between us was shifting, and I could feel the undertow pulling her away. I didn't know it then, but the real storm was only just beginning. I didn't start digging because I wanted to be right. I started because something inside me, a quiet instinct honed by years of listening, watching, and loving, was whispering that something wasn't right. The moment Claire asked for space, I felt the shift. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Not the natural distance that comes with adulthood or building a life of your own. No, this was something else, artificial, manufactured. Like someone was carefully building a wall brick by brick between us. And that someone was Ethan. The night after our conversation, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring out at the street lamps flickering through my window, remembering his smile the first night we met, the way he'd praised my lasagna, the way he'd mentioned the beach house 3 times. It hadn't felt random. And now, it didn't feel innocent. I started with the basics. I opened my laptop and typed in his full name, Ethan Ward. Nothing alarming came up at first. No mugshots, no scandalous headlines. A few photos from networking events in Boston, a sparse LinkedIn profile that listed him as a consultant specializing in private wealth strategy, which sounded vague enough to mean nothing. The real clue came from an unlikely source, my sister Susan. Susan had retired 2 years ago and moved back to Kennebunkport to be closer to the ocean and her grandchildren. She still knew everyone in town. When I mentioned Ethan offhand one afternoon, Susan went keyed. "Ethan Ward," she said. "You sure that's his last name?" "Positive." "Why?" Her brows furrowed. "You remember Marjorie Bennett? She's on the Historical Society board with me. She mentioned someone by that name last spring. Said he'd approached her about a potential business investment, something about renovating one of the older waterfront properties." My stomach tightened. "Did she invest?" "No," said he was charming, but something about him felt off. He knew too much about her. Asked odd questions about her late husband's estate. She walked away, but she kept his card just in case. I asked Susan to call Marjorie. 2 days later, I was sitting in Marjorie's cozy sunroom, sipping Earl Grey and flipping through a file folder she'd kept out of what she called old lady caution. Inside were notes, emails, copies of a property proposal that looked impressive on the surface, professional, slick, but had no actual business registration behind it. He said he specialized in helping retirees unlock the hidden value in their real estate. Marjorie said, frowning, but when I asked for references, he changed the subject. I scanned the emails. The tone was eerily familiar, overly flattering, persistent, but polite. "What made you walk away?" I asked. He said something strange. She replied, mentioned that it must be lonely, being widowed with so much property to manage alone, like he was offering me more than a business deal. I thanked her and left with a copy of the documents tucked in my purse. The pieces were starting to align. Back home, I called one of Claire's old college roommates, Melissa. They'd lost touch over the years, but I remembered Melissa had always had a sharp intuition. When I asked about Ethan, her voice lowered. "I don't know much about him," she said, "but Claire changed after she met him. We used to have wine nights once a month." Then she stopped replying. Said Ethan thought our group was too negative. Negative. That word again? I'd been called dramatic. Her friends. Negativa. Her coworkers. Too ambitious. The common denominator. Anyone who might question Ethan. Melissa hesitated, then added, "You might want to talk to Rachel Kim. She was a few years ahead of us at school. I heard she dated someone named Ethan Ward, too." Ended badly. I found Rachel on LinkedIn and sent a message. She replied within hours. "Yes, I dated Ethan. We were engaged. I'm happy to talk off the record." What she told me confirmed everything I feared. They met in 2019. He was charming, attentive, seemed genuinely interested in her family's restaurant business. Within 6 months, he'd moved in. Within 9, he convinced her to give him access to one of her accounts to help manage things more efficiently. He said he had a background in finance. Rachel told me over the phone. He talked about building a future together. He even pushed for a prenup, ironically, to protect me. Then came the gambling debt, the late-night phone calls, the secretive behavior. Her father finally did a background check and uncovered a string of aliases. And worse, another woman before Rachel. Same pattern. He disappeared before we could confront him. Rachel said, "It took me over a year to recover. When I hung up, I felt my fingers trembling against the receiver. My daughter was marrying a con man." No. Scratch. That my daughter had already married a con man. The call came on a crisp Wednesday morning. I was deadheading the roses, pruning them gently. When my phone rang, Claire's name lit up the screen. "Hi, Mom," she said. Her voice was strange, tight, mechanical. "Just wanted to let you know. Ethan and I got married yesterday." The pruning shears froze in my hand. "Yesterday," I repeated. "But the wedding's supposed to be in October. We decided to do something more intimate," she said. "Just close friends and family." Trevor felt like a big wedding was too much pressure. Family, friends, not me. Congratulations. I managed, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Thanks." "Oh, and Mom, Ethan and I were wondering if you could send us the keys to the beach house. We're thinking of spending our honeymoon there, since we didn't really plan a trip." There it was. The real reason for the call. Not to share joy. Not to include me. But to ask for keys to a house that apparently belonged to them now, in their eyes, I said yes. Of course I did. Then I hung up. And that's when the plan began. Not revenge. Not yet. But justice. Real. Measured. Carefully wrapped justice. The wind was sharp that Thursday morning, crisp with the scent of salt and dried leaves. I stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup on the stove, pretending everything was normal while my mind raced in silent calculation. My daughter was married. She was married to a man who had lied his way into her heart and now stood poised to lie his way into her inheritance. And all she wanted from me, her mother, was the key to the beach house. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. Anger is what you feel when someone cuts you off in traffic or forgets your birthday. This was something colder, deeper. It wasn't the fire of fury, but the weight of betrayal not just by Ethan, but by the version of Claire who had allowed herself to believe I didn't matter anymore. But I knew who was behind that transformation. I knew it with the certainty that only a mother could know. So I started making calls. The first was to a private investigator I'd worked with once before, back when a neighbor's son had gone missing, and I'd helped organize a community search. His name was Greg Mullins, a former police detective who now specialized in quiet investigations. I need background on a man named Ethan Ward. I told him. I believe he's using that name currently, but I'm not sure it's his first alias. Greg didn't ask too many questions. He said he'd run everything he could find and get back to me within the week. While I waited, I began gathering what I already knew. I printed out Ethan's LinkedIn profile, cross-referenced his so-called consulting business, and found that it was little more than a shell. No listed clients, no testimonials, no tax records. His website was slick and professional, but the footer listed a generic office building in Boston that housed over 200 businesses. A rented mailbox. Most likely. I called the law firm that had handled David's estate, Margaret Hill's office in Portland. Margaret had known David, had handled the long mess of paperwork after his financial collapse, and had remained a family ally long after our divorce. When I explained what I suspected, she didn't hesitate. "Let me pull the files," she said. "I'll call you back in an hour." She called back in 45 minutes. "There's something you need to see," she told me. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" The next day, I sat across from her, in a polished corner office overlooking the harbor. Margaret pushed a manila folder across the desk. "Your ex-husband had records going back to 1987. His business partner at the time was William Morrison." The name struck a bell, low and distant. Morrison, Ethan's grandfather. If I remembered Rachel Kim's story correctly, David and Morrison co-invested in a shopping center development. Morrison embezzled funds over $2 million and disappeared. David took the fall. He lost everything. His marriage, his credit, nearly lost custody of Claire. 2. Margaret tapped the folder. Before Morrison died in 2093, he confessed to his grandson, told him about the stolen funds, even where some of it was hidden in offshore accounts. I stared at the folder, my stomach turning. "So Ethan knew?" I asked. "He's been accessing stolen money. That's what it looks like. And because David never recovered it, those funds legally are part of his estate. And since Claire is his heir, she's entitled to every penny." I took the folder home and read every word. I didn't sleep that night. Greg called the next morning. "Ran your guy. Real name is Ethan Morrison Ward. His grandfather was William Morrison, same guy from the embezzlement case. He's got no criminal record himself, but he's been engaged twice in the last 6 years. Emma Chen, whose family owns a restaurant chain, and Lindsay Grant, trust fund heiress. Both engagements ended after financial red flags. One family found gambling debts. The other discovered forged documents. Greg paused. He's never been convicted. Too slippery. But the pattern's clear. He targets women with money, especially women with strained family ties. Gets in, gains trust, isolates them, then siphons resources. You weren't wrong to be suspicious. I asked for all the documents. Greg emailed them within the hour. By Friday morning, I had everything I needed. I spent the next day assembling a leather-bound portfolio. Inside, I placed the following: a copy of David's estate paperwork, highlighting Claire's legal inheritance. Bank statements showing Ethan's recent activity in the offshore accounts tied to Morrison. A timeline of Ethan's previous engagements, with screenshots and dates. A signed affidavit from Rachel Kim, detailing her experience. Business registration records proving Ethan's consulting firm was a front. A copy of the original 1987 partnership agreement between David Parker and William Morrison. A notarized letter from Margaret Hill stating the legal claim Claire now had over the missing funds. Then, in the back pocket, I placed 2 silver keys. The keys to the beach house. I wrapped the whole package in elegant silver paper, tied it with a white satin ribbon, and wrote a simple note. Congratulations on your marriage. Every new husband should know about his wife's family history. With love, Helen. Then I drove to Claire and Ethan's apartment. It was early. The city still slept. I left the package neatly on their doorstep, took a photo for proof, and drove away. I didn't look back. I went home, made a pot of tea, and sat on the porch, waiting. The call came at 2:17 p.m. My phone buzzed on the porch railing. Claire's name. But when I answered, it wasn't her voice. It was Ethan's, and he was screaming, "You crazy old witch. What the hell is wrong with you?" I took a slow sip of tea. "Hello, Ethan. I take it you opened your wedding gift. This is harassment. You think this is funny. You want to ruin our lives. I'm calling the police." "I'm confused." "Dear," I said evenly, "are you referring to the collection of public records I compiled? Or the notarized legal documents outlining your wife's rightful inheritance?" In the background, I heard Claire crying. "Trevor, Ethan. Just let me talk to her," I said calmly. "No, this is insane. You're trying to destroy our marriage. I'm trying to protect my daughter." I cut in. Something her husband should have done. There was a beat of silence. Then the call disconnected. I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the wind brush over my face. The seeds were planted. Now, we would see what grew. The silence that followed Ethan's call was thick and long. I didn't expect to hear from Claire right away, not after what I'd dropped on their doorstep. Truth is a gift. Yes, but also a bomb, and I just lit the fuse. It took 2 days. On Sunday morning, I opened the front door to find Claire sitting on my porch steps, arms wrapped around her knees, face pale and drawn. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was a mess. Her clothes rumpled. She wore the same outfit I'd seen her in last week. Her eyes were red, swollen, and glassy with something between confusion and heartbreak. I didn't say anything at first. I just opened the door wider. "Come inside," I said. She followed me into the kitchen like a shadow, dropping her purse on the floor with a heavy thud. I made coffee strong, black, the way she liked it. We sat at the same old oak table where she used to do her homework, where I once patched up scraped knees and coaxed her into studying for math tests. Now we were here, not to solve a multiplication problem, but something much harder. Undoing a lie wrapped in love. "Tell me everything," she said, her voice almost a whisper. I passed her the coffee and sat down across from her. I didn't rush. I didn't lecture. I didn't say "I told you so." Instead, I walked her through everything, starting with the story of her father and William Morrison. The real reason David had spiraled, the betrayal that had gutted our family before she was old enough to understand. I laid out the documents Greg had uncovered, the offshore accounts, Ethan's other engagements, his aliases, his business registrations that led nowhere. Her jaw tightened when she saw the affidavit from Rachel Kim, her hands trembling as she read the email threads between Ethan and his accomplice. "I found these in his drawer," she said quietly, pulling a manila envelope from her purse. Inside were printouts, emails between Ethan and someone named Kevin Brooks, discussions about strategies and targets. One message was dated 6 weeks before Claire and Ethan accidentally met at that cafe in Boston. It read, "Claire Parker, only child, marketing exec. Father died. Mom owns property. Solid angle. Working on meet cute." Her hands dropped into her lap, and for a moment, she just stared at nothing. "He planned everything," she said. "Even the coffee spill. He told me it was fate. He laughed when I said it felt like a movie." I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. She flinched, then gripped it tight like she used to when she was 5, and the thunder got too loud. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she whispered. "I was horrible to you." "No," I said gently. "You were lied to, carefully, expertly, repeatedly. That kind of manipulation. It works because it makes you believe you're choosing. I didn't even invite you to my wedding." She choked. I told myself it was about boundaries, but I was just afraid. Afraid to upset him. Afraid he'd leave if I didn't go along. We sat in silence for a while, letting the waves of grief roll through. Not for Ethan, but for the life she thought she had, for the version of herself she'd been forced to become to keep him happy. Later that afternoon, Claire made a call to Rachel Kim. She put it on speaker, her hands still shaking. Rachel's voice was calm, professional, but warm. She didn't sound like someone broken. She sounded like someone who had already climbed out of the hole. "Claire," she said, "I've been where you are. And you're not crazy. You're not weak. You're one of many. He's been doing this for years." "Why me?" Claire asked, her voice cracking. "Because you're successful, kind, and have something he wanted. That's his pattern. He studies women who have both independence and assets. Then he isolates them from their support systems." "Did you love him?" Claire asked. There was a pause. I loved the version he showed me. The version that liked my favorite movies, remembered my coffee order, complimented my family's traditions. But that version didn't exist. It was a mask. After the call ended, Claire stared at the phone for a long time. Then she turned to me. "What do I do?" I answered the only way I knew how. "You fight back." And so she did. The next day, Claire met with Margaret Hill. She walked into the law office in a wrinkled blouse and tear-streaked eyeliner. But she walked out with something stronger direction. Purpose. Margaret confirmed what we already knew. Claire had legal claim to the Morrison accounts, now worth nearly $4 million. But more than that, Ethan's access to those accounts meant he could be charged with receiving stolen property and, if proven intentional, conspiracy to defraud. Margaret also arranged a call with Special Agent Dana Collins from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Agent Collins had already received tips about Ethan from Rachel's father and another former fiancée's family. They'd been building a case, but lacked first-hand cooperation from someone currently inside Ethan's circle. Until now, Claire didn't hesitate. "If I can help bring him down, I will." Agent Collins explained the risks, the precautions, the steps they'd take. The apartment would be wired. Claire would wear a mic. All she had to do was get him to confirm on record that he knew about the money and that their marriage was part of his plan. "He'll try to charm you," the agent warned. "He'll flip it back on you. Promise a change. Blame stress. Be ready." Claire looked straight ahead. "I don't need to pretend anymore. I just need him to talk." That Friday, Ethan texted her, "Can we talk? I miss you. I'm ready to come home." Claire looked at me. Should I respond? "Tell him what he wants to hear," I said. "Make it easy for him to come back." She typed, "I miss you too. I'm sorry I doubted you. Mom's been trying to turn me against you. I see that now." He responded within minutes. "I knew you'd come around. Let's start fresh. I'll be home Friday night. Love you." I watched her face as she read it. There was no smile, no hesitation, just a steely calm. Friday came. Agent Collins and her team arrived early. They set up in an adjacent apartment. Claire practiced with the wire, running through likely scenarios. At 7:43 p.m., she texted me 2 words. "He's here." At 8:15 p.m., he brought flowers, playing the sweet husband. Says he wants to plan a honeymoon. At 9:07 p.m., he's talking about accessing my savings to rebuild our future. At 9:31 p.m., got him to admit he knew about the Morrison money. Said it was part of our long-term plan. FBI moving in. My phone slipped from my hand, landing on the couch. I covered my mouth. I'm not sure whether to cry or laugh. It was over. Not the whole fight. Not yet. But the first battle, the moment of truth. Trevor, no. Ethan was caught in his own web. And my daughter, She was no longer his prey. She was the one holding the scissors. The arrest made the Monday morning news. Not in screaming headlines or dramatic footage, Ethan Ward wasn't a celebrity, after all, but in the tidy little crime section of the Portland Press-Herald, there it was. Local man arrested in multi-state financial fraud investigation. The article was brief but damning. Ethan Ward, a Boston-based financial consultant, was taken into federal custody on charges related to conspiracy, Wirefraud, and money laundering. Federal authorities believe Ward may be connected to multiple instances of financial manipulation targeting women across state lines. Further details are pending. There was no photo of Claire, no mention of the beach house, but there was Ethan's mugshot still in his tailored shirt, but no longer polished or composed. His eyes, sunken and dull, stared ahead like a man finally realizing the mask had been ripped away. Claire brought Chinese takeout that day. She set the bags on my kitchen table like we used to do when she visited from college. Only this time, she didn't collapse onto the bench with stories about office politics or roommate drama. She sat straight, silent, and serious. "Agent Collins called this morning," she said. "They've officially charged him. Conspiracy, money laundering, fraud, across 3 states. His bail was set at $500,000. He blinked. $500,000. Claire nodded. They consider him a flight risk. His access to offshore accounts makes him dangerous. And the funds in those accounts frozen as of this morning. We unpacked lo mein and dumplings in silence. It felt absurd, eating noodles and sweet and sour chicken, while the man who had tried to dismantle our lives sat in a jail cell. But maybe that's how justice begins quietly, in ordinary moments. After all the storming has passed, he called me from the holding facility. Claire said. I stopped mid-bite. What did he say? That I'd betrayed him, that I'd let my mother poison me, that I'd ruined the only love I'd ever have. She said it flatly, as if reading a grocery list, but her hands were shaking slightly as she reached for a napkin. I hung up. I nodded. Good. Mom, she said, softer now. How long did you know? I met her eyes. I started suspecting 3 months ago, when you told me about the boundaries conversation. That's when I hired the investigator. She looked down at her lap, processing. And you didn't tell me right away. Would you have believed me? After a long pause, she shook her head. No, I would have thought you were just being possessive. Or threatened. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Claire wiped her mouth and set down her chopsticks. Agent Collins said they've been watching him for months. Apparently, my case provided the final piece they needed. But there's something else. They're planning a civil trial. 2. For damages, for restitution. Emma Kim and Lindsay Grant are filing together. They want me to join. Will you? She nodded. Slowly. Oh, I will. I want every dollar back. Every lie exposed. I saw it then, the strength returning to her. The fierce little girl who once challenged a teacher for calling her too emotional. The teenager who refused to let a boy cheat off her in calculus. The woman who had been buried under someone else's story for too long. And now she was writing her own. The Wednesday. Claire was in meetings with Margaret Hill and federal attorneys. Margaret explained how the legal system would approach Ethan's financial trail because he had knowingly accessed funds tied to embezzlement funds, still legally linked to David Parker's estate. Claire had a direct and powerful claim. He's been living off money stolen from your family. Margaret said, he married you not for love, but for legal access to the estate you didn't even know you were owed. The team began preparing for depositions, compiling exhibits, and issuing subpoenas. Claire signed off on her official participation in the class action lawsuit, joining Rachel and Lindsay under the same banner. Ward v. Victims of Fraud. Meanwhile, the FBI expanded their investigation. Kevin Brooks, the man Ethan had exchanged emails with, had been arrested 2 days prior and was already seeking a deal. He agreed to testify in exchange for a lighter sentence. He's flipped, Agent Collins said, and he's naming names. Not just Ethan, others too. Apparently, Ethan ran a small circle, 2 or 3 men who shared notes, researched targets, sometimes even helped with fake job references or legal letters. It's more organized than we thought. The news shook Claire. But it also gave her clarity. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was part of something bigger, a line of women who had all believed the same lie, and who had all chosen to stand up rather than disappear. Then came the social media storm. The local article was picked up by a regional news blog, which caught the eye of a true crime YouTuber. Within 2 days, there was a video titled, "The Consultant Conman: How Ethan Ward Tricked His Way into Millions." It had over 200,000 views in the first 24 hours. Claire's phone lit up with messages from coworkers, college acquaintances, even people she hadn't spoken to in years. "Is this real? Is that your husband? Are you okay?" She replied only once, publicly. "Yes, this is real. Yes, I'm okay. And yes, I'm going to make sure no one else is hurt by him again." The post went viral. People flooded her inbox with support. Other women began to come forward. Though most didn't want to go public, they'd seen Ethan at parties, at fundraisers. Some had gone on dates. One had been approached for a business opportunity. The case had cracked something open. For the first time, Claire felt like her story mattered, not just as a personal wound, but as a warning. One night, I found her on the beach behind the house in Kennebunkport, wrapped in an old quilt, staring out at the waves. She didn't turn when I approached, just spoke softly. "I always thought I'd get married here," she said, barefoot in the sand, lights in the dunes, music floating over the ocean. I sat beside her. "You still can." She glanced at me, a sad smile forming. "Do you think I'll ever trust myself again?" I took her hand. "You trusted your gut when it mattered. You came back. That takes more strength than most people ever find." The moon was high that night, bright enough to make the water shimmer like glass. And in that silence, I saw it. Not just my daughter reclaiming herself, but becoming someone stronger. Claire wasn't just surviving. She was preparing for the next battle. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Not in temperature, but in atmosphere clean, clinical, stripped of emotion. And yet, when Claire walked in on the first day of the civil trial, I could feel a current of strength move through the room. She wore a navy blazer, her hair pulled back, eyes sharp. On either side of her sat Rachel Kim and Lindsay Grant. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was its own kind of bond. 3 women who had survived the same storm and had come together to ensure no one else ever would. The judge entered. The attorneys stood. And just like that, the trial began. The prosecution opened with a stark declaration. This is not a case about love gone wrong. This is a case about a calculated predator who used love as a weapon to gain financial access to multiple women's lives and legacies. They laid it out piece by piece, starting with the timeline of Ethan's relationships, each more methodically constructed than the last. Then came the financials, deposits into joint accounts, wire transfers to offshore banks, fake consulting invoices, screenshots, emails, bank statements, all detailing a long con, so refined it bordered on art. Ethan sat across the aisle, still wearing expensive clothes, but they hung differently now. His hair was unkempt, his eyes sunken. Without the performance, the polish, he looked ordinary, just another man who thought charm could mask deceit forever. The defense tried to spin a different story. He was misguided, the attorney said. He loved these women. He made mistakes. But this is not fraud. It's emotional confusion and poor boundaries. But then Rachel took the stand. She told the story without tears. Her voice was calm, unwavering, as she described how Ethan had charmed her parents, attended family events, and slowly nudged her away from anyone who questioned his intentions. She spoke of the shared accounts, the false business plans, and the moment her father discovered the gambling debts he'd hidden in her name. "He told me I was the only person who truly understood him," she said. "But the truth is, he never even saw me. I was just an opportunity." Then came Lindsay. Her story was different, in tone softer, shakier, but no less powerful. She spoke of how Ethan made her feel safe after the death of her brother, how he stepped in when she was grieving, saying all the right things, making her feel like her pain had finally found a place to rest. He said I didn't need anyone else, that my family was toxic, that I was better off trusting only him, she said. By the time I realized what he was doing, he had access to everything. Finally, it was Claire's turn. She stood tall as she walked to the witness stand. The room was quiet. Even Ethan looked up. She spoke of their relationship from the beginning. The way he'd swept in, the accidental meeting, the romantic gestures. She detailed how he slowly turned her against her own instincts, how he redefined love to mean control, and independence to mean secrecy. By the time we were married, she said, her voice strong, I believed that cutting my mother out was healthy, that doubting him was betrayal, that asking questions meant I didn't love him. She paused, then turned her gaze directly toward Ethan. But the truth was this. I didn't marry a man. I married a story he invented. And once I stopped reading it, he turned violent, not with his hands, but with his manipulation. The prosecution rested their case after Claire's testimony, confident that the jury had seen through the defense's attempt at pity, but they had one more surprise in store. On day 3, the prosecution called a witness no one expected, Kevin Brooks, Ethan's former partner, the man behind the emails. He walked into the courtroom in a cheap suit, flanked by 2 federal officers. His deal with the government had granted him reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation. He took the stand and confirmed everything. He studied them, Kevin said, had folders on each target. He'd research family history, financial background, emotional vulnerabilities. How did he meet Claire Parker? The attorney asked. He planned it, tracked her routine, waited for the right moment, made it look like fate. Kevin's testimony outlined Ethan's pattern in chilling detail, how he staged accidental meetings, how he used psychological tactics to isolate each woman, how he learned just enough about each victim's past to appear deeply understanding, how he always knew when to propose right before moving in on the family assets. Did he ever express remorse? The lawyer asked. Kevin scoffed. He used to say, "You can't scam someone who doesn't want to be rescued." He thought they wanted him. The courtroom was silent. Ethan didn't look up once during Kevin's testimony. His attorney didn't cross-examine. There was nothing left to say. The prosecution rested. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Claire leaned against the wall, breathing deeply. Rachel stood beside her, arms crossed, eyes glistening. Lindsay wrapped her scarf tighter and stared at the tiled floor. "You okay?" I asked Claire, placing a hand on her shoulder. She nodded. "It's like pulling out a thorn you didn't realize had gone in so deep." The jury took less than 4 hours. They found in favor of the plaintiffs. The judge awarded $8, $2 million, in total restitution, including damages for emotional distress, financial loss, and punitive compensation. Ethan was ordered to pay everything he'd stolen and then some. His accounts were frozen, his property seized, and because the fraud spanned state lines and involved marriage manipulation, federal criminal charges moved forward as well. Claire didn't cry when the verdict was read. She simply closed her eyes, breathed in, and let the weight fall off her shoulders. Outside the courthouse, reporters tried to approach. Flashbulbs went off. Microphones were shoved forward. But none of the women stopped. This wasn't about publicity. It was about closure. Back home, Claire sat with me on the porch, a blanket across her lap, a mug of tea in her hands. "I didn't think I'd survive this," she said. "But I did." "You didn't just survive," I said. "You stood up. You told the truth. And you helped others find theirs." She smiled, small but genuine. "Mom." "Yes, sweetheart. When I get married again someday, if that ever happens, I want it to be at the beach house. Barefoot. No secrets. No masks. Just truth." I squeezed her hand. That's the only kind of wedding worth having. The federal courtroom in Portland was nothing like the civil trial. The air felt heavier. The stakes were clearer. This time, Ethan wasn't just being sued for money. He was on trial for his freedom. Claire and I arrived early. She wore a simple black dress and a pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. No frills, no dramatics. Just quiet resolve. The prosecution opened with a summary of everything the court had already heard. The offshore accounts, the impersonations, the multiple victims across multiple states. But this time, the charges were criminal wire fraud, identity, deception, conspiracy, and marriage fraud, with intent to commit grand larceny. Ethan sat with his public defender, now dressed in a standard suit from the court wardrobe. Gone were the sleek ties and pocket squares. His hair had grown out unevenly. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders hunched, his face ashen, the corners of his mouth twitching whenever a new piece of evidence was introduced. The prosecution didn't need to rehash everything. The civil case had laid the foundation. The goal now was to prove intent, that Ethan hadn't just lied, but had planned, calculated, and executed fraud from the beginning. They brought Kevin Brooks back to the stand. He was less nervous this time. His tone was sharper, more direct. He knew the weight of his cooperation. Ethan told me he'd marry into money. Kevin said, not by accident, not because he fell in love. He said the key was making sure she didn't see it coming, that it had to feel like destiny. Did he ever mention the Parker estate specifically? The prosecutor asked. Kevin nodded. Yes. He said her dad lost millions, that it was probably still out there, just waiting for the right claimant. Ensru. There it was. Intent. The prosecution rested. Ethan's defense attorney called no witnesses. Instead, he delivered a half-hearted plea for leniency. My client suffered trauma in childhood, lost his father young, and developed a warped sense of self-worth that led him to manipulate others. He regrets his actions and hopes the court will consider rehabilitation. Claire leaned over and whispered, "He's still trying to play a part." I didn't reply. I just reached for her hand. Then the judge spoke. Before sentencing. Maides. She offered Ethan the chance to speak. He stood, cleared his throat, and began. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said. I thought I was doing what I had to surviving in a world where people like me don't get second chances. His voice cracked slightly. I did love Claire. That part was real. Claire didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. When he sat down, the judge turned to the victims. Would anyone like to make a statement? Claire stood. The room went silent. She walked to the center of the floor, not with anger, but with authority. My name is Claire Parker. I am not here as someone seeking revenge. I am here because I believe in consequences. She looked directly at Ethan. You studied me. You found my weaknesses. You used words like boundaries and intimacy as weapons. You made me feel like loving my mother was betrayal, like questioning you was disloyal. You turned my independence into a liability and my compassion into a target. She turned toward the judge. But I'm not broken. I'm not bitter. I'm not afraid. I'm here to say that people like him, people who build traps out of charm and manipulation, should not be free to hurt others. A long pause. Then, I hope he spends every day of his sentence thinking about the women he deceived. Not because I want him to suffer, but because I want him to understand the damage he caused, not just to bank accounts, but to trust, to self-worth, to lives. She returned to her seat without looking back. The judge leaned forward. Ethan Ward, also known as Ethan Morrison Ward, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay full restitution to the plaintiffs, totaling over $8 million. You are further barred from engaging in financial consulting or related services upon release. Ethan's head dropped. No outburst. No denial. Just silence. Afterward, as we left the courtroom, reporters swarmed. Claire said nothing. She didn't need to. That evening, we returned to the beach house. The waves were calm. The tide was low. Claire stood barefoot on the sand, letting the wind tangle her hair. She looked peaceful, not like someone who had won a case, but like someone who had reclaimed her voice. Mom, she said quietly, I'm going to write about this someday. Maybe for women who've been through something similar. Maybe just for me. But I want people to know this didn't define me. I smiled. It revealed you, I said. And it did. She had been lost in a storm of manipulation, but she had sailed her way out stronger, wiser, and no longer alone. That night, under the soft glow of porch lights, Claire raised a glass of wine. To truth, she said. The kind that doesn't always come easy, but always sets you free. The days after the sentencing passed in a kind of stillness. No court appearances. No reporters. No lawyers calling with updates. For the first time in months, Claire and I were simply allowed to be two women bound not by crisis, but by survival and love. We spent that first weekend back at the beach house, not for any special occasion, just because Claire had packed a small bag and showed up on my doorstep with a bottle of red wine and a sheepish smile. "I thought maybe we could go down to Kennebunkport," she said. "I could use a few nights of not thinking." I didn't hesitate to. "I'll pack us sandwiches." We drove in quiet, not the heavy, anxious kind. This was something lighter, comfortable, like an old song we both knew the words to. When we arrived, the house looked exactly as it always had: white shiplap walls, weathered shutters, driftwood decorations hanging above the windows. Nothing about the house had changed, but we had. Claire wandered through the living room, running her fingers along the bookshelves. The sand dollar mobile, the old throw pillows she used to insist were ugly but soft. She stopped in front of the framed photo on the mantel, her age 6, holding a pail of shells, her cheeks red from sunburn, a tooth missing from her smile. "I used to think this place was magic," she said quietly. "It still is," I replied. That night, we made dinner together, clam chowder, her father's old recipe. Claire wore one of my aprons, hair pulled into a messy bun, flour streaking her cheek like war paint. We talked about everything and nothing, about how the stars looked brighter here, about how the beach always smelled like salt and old stories. Then we sat on the porch with our feet tucked under blankets, sipping tea as the waves whispered against the shore. "Do you remember the summer I got stung by that jellyfish?" Claire asked, suddenly. I laughed. "You screamed like the world was ending." I ran down the beach barefoot with a water bottle and a meat tenderizer. "Everyone thought you were nuts." Everyone was right. She smiled, then looked out into the dark. Her voice lowered. "I thought I lost you." "You didn't," I said. "You were just standing in a fog." Claire was quiet for a moment. I think the hardest part wasn't the lies he told me. It was the truth I ignored. I saw the signs. Mom, I felt them, but I wanted so badly for it to be real. "That's not weakness," I said. "That's hope. And hope isn't something to be ashamed of." She looked over at me, her eyes glassy. "I don't deserve you." I shook my head. "You're wrong. You are me. Every strong part of you came from here." I tapped her chest. "And here?" I tapped my own. She exhaled, had a long breath she'd been holding for months. The next morning, we walked the beach barefoot, just like old times. The tide had pulled up broken shells and pieces of seaweed, but the sand was still soft. The water still cold. Claire carried her shoes in one hand, a steaming cup of coffee in the other. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about writing. A book, maybe. Or just essays. Letters. Something to put it all in perspective. If it helps one woman ask a question sooner, it's worth it." I nodded. "Tell the truth, and you give someone else permission to tell theirs." Claire stopped and stared out at the water. "I want to turn this place into something more." "What do you mean?" "A retreat. For women who've been through it. Not just fraud, but betrayal, isolation, gaslighting. A place to rest, to remember who they were before." I stared at her, blinking. "You want to open a sanctuary?" She shrugged. "Not a big one. Just a handful of rooms. Workshops, yoga, therapy, journaling. You can run the kitchen." I laughed. "So now I'm the cook and the counselor. You've always been both." We walked back to the house with a new energy in our steps. That night, we sat on the porch again, sketching rough plans on a napkin, room layouts, porch renovations, ideas for names. Claire looked at me and said, "What about Sea Glass House? Something broken, turned beautiful." I nodded. "That's exactly what we are." Later that night, I found her curled up on the couch with an old journal. She had dog-eared pages, circled passages, highlighted a quote I used to have taped to the fridge. "You can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending." She looked up and smiled. "New ending, Mom." And I knew deep in my bones that the worst was behind us. Spring came slowly that year, but with purpose. The snow along the dunes melted into muddy salt lines. and the air began to smell more like seaweed than smoke. It was the kind of season that didn't ask for permission to change it, just unfolded, one steady wave at a time. So did we. Claire and I spent every weekend at the beach house, drafting and dreaming. What began as an idea over tea and napkins became full architectural plans by May. Claire worked with a local firm headed by a woman named Naomi, who'd once lost everything in a divorce and found herself again on the coast of Maine. "Women like us build differently," she said during one of our early meetings. "We know how to make space for pain and light at the same time." We converted the guest wing into 3 small suites, each with its own writing desk and view of the sea. The sunroom became a communal lounge with bookshelves, soft blankets, and shelves of hand-painted mugs Claire found at a local artisan market. The attic, long forgotten, was turned into a quiet meditation room with whitewashed floors and driftwood chimes that danced when the windows were open. We worked slowly, deliberately, not because we didn't want to rush, but because we didn't need to. Every coat of paint, every tile placed, every lamp hung, it was all part of the healing. Claire didn't talk much about Ethan anymore, not out of fear or avoidance, but because she was done giving him space in her story. What he took from her was real, but what she was building in its place was even more so. One afternoon in June, while we were replanting the garden beds, Claire wiped the sweat from her brow and said, "You know what the best part of this is?" "What?" "I get to decide who I am now. Not who he said I was. Not who I thought I had to be." She paused. "Just me." Finally, the first group of visitors came in July. A soft launch. Rachel was the first to arrive, her suitcase worn, but her smile bright. Then Lindsay, who brought a small stack of poetry books and insisted on sleeping with the window open to hear the waves. They didn't come as victims. They came as witnesses, survivors, friends. We didn't need a fancy name for what happened that week. We cooked. We walked barefoot in the sand. We talked late into the night. We cried. Sometimes, but mostly, we laughed. Rachel taught everyone how to make dumplings from scratch. Lindsay read aloud from Mary Oliver while the sun set. Claire led a journaling session in the attic room where women wrote letters to themselves, not the broken versions, but the strong ones still inside. I cooked. It was the most useful thing I could offer warmth in a bowl. The tradition passed through spoons and smells and flavors. On the last night, we lit a bonfire on the beach. Rachel tossed a piece of driftwood into the flames and said, "We don't have to burn the past, but we don't have to carry it either." Claire looked up at the stars and whispered, "That's exactly it." Word spread slowly at first, through whispers and quiet texts, not websites or ads. A woman from Vermont called, then one from Rhode Island, then someone from as far as Chicago. They came with different stories, divorces, losses, betrayals. Not all were scams. Some were just wounds that never found space to close. Seaglass House became that space. It wasn't a retreat in the commercial sense. It wasn't therapy. It wasn't a cure. It was a harbor. By August, we'd hosted 3 full groups. I kept a notebook by the kitchen to collect little things they left behind, notes tucked under napkins, thank you cards, pressed flowers from the dunes. One read, "I remembered who I was here, and I think I like her." Claire and I would read them at night and smile, not with pride, with peace. One morning, Claire stood at the front gate holding a steaming cup of coffee and said, "Do you realize what we've done?" "What?" We turned a story of manipulation into a place of reclamation. She paused. "I thought Ethan broke me. But really, he just cracked the shell." I wrapped an arm around her shoulder. "You did the rest." Fall rolled in with its usual Maine magic golden leaves, salty breezes, and cozy cardigans. We hosted a writer's weekend for women who wanted to share their stories. Claire spoke for the first time publicly about what happened to her. Not in a courtroom, not in a therapy office, but here, in the living room where she'd once opened Christmas presents with me in pajamas. Her voice didn't shake. She told them about the red flags, the slow erosion of truth, the moment she realized love wasn't supposed to come with conditions. And then she said, "I don't need to be saved. I just needed someone to remind me that I could swim." The room was silent, too full of soft tears and knowing nods. After the session, A young woman from Connecticut approached her and whispered, "Your story helped me leave someone last week." Claire nodded, hugged her, and said, "That's why we're here." And that's what Seaglass House became. Not just a home, not just a project, but a lighthouse. For the women who came, for the women yet to come, and for us, mother and daughter who found our way back to each other not in spite of the storm, but because of it. It happened in the least dramatic way possible. Not a whirlwind, not a spark across a crowded room, just a conversation at the farmer's market on a quiet Saturday in October. Claire and I were there buying apples. We were planning a baking workshop for the next Seaglass House group, a simple day of pies and cider and stories, and she had insisted on finding the right kind of apples for the crust, not too sweet, not too mealy, preferably from a local orchard. That's when he bumped into us. Literally, a tall man in a soft flannel shirt, arms full of pumpkins, turned too quickly from a vendor booth and collided with Claire, sending one small gourd tumbling to the ground. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," he said, kneeling to pick it up. Claire laughed, brushing her shoulder. "It's okay. That pumpkin had it coming." He grinned. It did have a suspicious look. He glanced up and then paused, looking at her not in the way Ethan used to, measuring, calculating, but like he'd just remembered something important. Then he stood, offering a hand. "I'm Ben. I run the woodworking co-op across the street. I think we met once at that artisan event last spring." Claire blinked. "The Seaglass booth. You made the cedar candle holders." He smiled. "And you were the one with the sea salt caramels. My nieces are still talking about those." It was small talk, casual, nothing deeper than two people remembering a shared table and a windy afternoon. But later, as we loaded apples into the car, Claire looked at me and said, "He didn't ask me what I do. He asked what I made." That night, she found one of his business cards in the bottom of a bag from the artisan fair. It had a small knot ring printed on the corner and a handwritten note on the back. "To the woman with the best damn caramels in Maine, come visit the shop sometime. Ben." She didn't go the next day, or the next week, but one Saturday in November, she took a batch of leftover blueberry muffins and walked into his workshop. She didn't tell me until hours later. "I didn't even know why I was going," she said. "Just that. I wanted to see what someone looked like when they weren't trying to sell me a fantasy." Ben's co-op was filled with shavings of pine and the smell of varnish. He was repairing a bookshelf for a local school and invited her to sit and talk while he worked. She did. For 2 hours. They talked about food, wood grain, family. He mentioned his sister, a single mom who lived nearby. Claire told him about Seaglass House, but gently, without the weight of trauma, just enough to see if he would flinch. He didn't. Instead, he said, "Sounds like the kind of place more people should have." He didn't ask for her number. He offered her coffee. That was it. No rush. No pressure. When she told me, I asked her what she felt. Claire smiled. Just barely. Curious. Not infatuated. Not overwhelmed. Just curious. And that's how it began. Coffee once a week. Usually at the little cafe near the harbor. Walks through the market. Quiet check-ins by text that didn't ask for anything. Just offered space. He never asked about Ethan. He didn't push for details. And when Claire did tell him months later, in her own words, he just listened. Not with pity, but with presence. He said, "I hope that guy gets everything he deserves." She told me after. Then he passed me the pepper grinder and asked if I'd ever tried saffron in stew. There was no lightning bolt, but there was warmth. The kind that builds slowly. The kind that feels like the first deep breath after a long run. By December, Ben came to one of the Seaglass House Sunday dinners. He brought a cherrywood serving board he'd made himself and a homemade pecan pie that made everyone swoon. He was easy around people, gracious, unassuming, helpful, not a performer, not a showman, just present. After everyone left, Claire stood in the kitchen washing dishes while I dried. The light from the porch glowed soft against the frosted windows. "I don't know where it's going," she said, "and I'm okay with that. You're allowed to go slow." I told her, "You're not on anyone's timeline but your own." She smiled. "It's the first time I've felt that." She paused. Then added, he makes furniture from broken wood. Salvaged things. Says it's more meaningful when it has a story. I raised an eyebrow. Sounds familiar. She laughed. I guess we're both in the business of turning damage into something beautiful. That night, she left a note on the kitchen table. Dear Mom, thank you for never letting go. For holding the line when I didn't know who I was. If this becomes something, or if it becomes nothing, I'll still be whole. Love, Claire.